I am a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun.
He's inside the school shooting at the gun!
Well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
After shooting in the theater, I didn't have a plan of whether to die or not.
Hey everyone, I'm back today with a truly baffling case. It centers around an elementary school and its occupants who were taken hostage by a deranged husband and wife duo. I actually learned of this case from a viewer, so thanks for sharing it with me. Quickly, I wanted to add that I do my absolute best to gather only credible information. With that being said, it's entirely possible that information I obtain from some sources can be incorrect, and if that happens, I apologize. It is never my intent to spread false or incomplete information. It's especially difficult to verify information in these slightly older cases. So, if you have any additional information or would like to clear anything up, please leave it in the comments below. Also, I just wanted to quickly mention that I now have a membership that you guys can join to get special perks. Click the join button below or follow the link in the description to join. I would very much appreciate it. Without further ado, let's get right into this bizarre case. May 16, 1986, was like any other day in the minuscule town of Cokeville, Wyoming. With an estimated population of a little over 500 during the time of this case, Cokeville was truly miniature. This quaint town was thought to have been a peaceful and safe place to raise children, but that all changed on one Friday in 1986. Cokeville Elementary School was in the middle of their usual school day. Teachers were getting through their lessons as normal. All were happily awaiting the end of the day, since it would mark the beginning of the weekend. That was until married couple, David and Doris Young, entered the building with an array of firearms and a homemade gasoline bomb. The two of them had been planning a terrifying attack behind closed doors, which was about to play out. Before we go into the details of their horrific plan, let's back up and talk about David and Doris's life prior to the attack, starting with David. Thankfully, he kept meticulous notes of his adult life, which made it easier for investigators in particular to piece his life together. David Gary Young was born in California on June 12, 1943, making him 42 at the time of the case. When he was a child, he and his family moved from California to the small town of Cokeville, Wyoming. This is where he would grow up, supposedly leading a normal childhood for the most part. When David entered his 20s, however, his demeanor began to shift. He was reported to be a highly intelligent man, and apparently became fascinated with subjects such as psychology, philosophy, politics, and criminal justice. I read that David's personality was seen as upfront and volatile, with people his age often avoiding him. He also was known to be extremely smart, and would often talk about subjects which made no sense to the average person. All of this made it extremely difficult for him to form meaningful relationships in his life. Apparently, David was also exhibiting signs of serious mental illness, mainly obsessive-compulsive disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, and psychosis. I never found a source that listed the specifics of this claim, but a lot of articles report this. I also read that David carried an intense fascination with firearms in his early adult life, and even operated a gun shop in Cokeville for about 7 years. Apparently, he liked to stroll around town with 2 revolvers in hip holsters, wearing a cowboy hat. The townspeople nicknamed him Wyatt Earp, in reference to the notorious old Western lawman. Now, I'm not sure if his deteriorating mental health was obvious to those who knew him at the time, but now we are able to look back at his odd behavior and understand a bit about when and how he unraveled. We know all of this mainly because, in his 20s, David started to document his entire life with meticulous detail. Believed to have started around the age of 25, David began to record every single detail in his life, such as all of the jobs he held and every address he resided at. He didn't stop there, though. He also kept detailed entries about even the most minute details of his day-to-day life, such as what he ate each day, who he interacted with, and even what the weather was like. His writings did not only consist of his personal details, though. He soon got into documenting his thoughts on religion, the afterlife, and reincarnation, as well as his issues with the ones who held power over him, such as the government. David was growing bored, and felt his life was meaningless, so he did what he could to change that. Sometime in the 1970s, David attended college in Nebraska, studying criminal justice. He did end up earning his degree, graduating near the top of his class. After finishing his schooling, David moved back to Cokeville, where he met and married his first wife. Together, they went on to have 2 daughters, named Angela and Princess. David became Cokeville's only police officer in 1979, serving as a town marshal of sorts. Finally, David felt as though he had a purpose in this world. He obviously didn't care about his image too much, though, as he began to have numerous affairs with women in the town. Many residents reported to have started noticing bizarre mannerisms from David around this time as well. Overall, there were multiple instances where his character could be seen as questionable. His position as the town's only police officer didn't last too long, as David was fired about 6 months later due to his wildly inappropriate behavior. His life was taking a steep decline, as his wife soon left him as well, citing David's unpredictable and concerning behavior, as well as his habit of cheating on her as her reasoning for divorce. It's around this time that David dove into a violent downward spiral. The fact that his wife had left him, and he was fired from the job which gave him purpose, was the beginning of what was to come. David sank into a deep depression and began to drink heavily following his job loss and divorce, frequenting a few local bars. It was in one of these bars that he met a young waitress named Doris Waters. Doris was born on September 12, 1938, in Idaho, and was 47 years old at the time of this case. Doris was also going through a rough time when she met David, having just lost her son in a tragic accident. The two of them quickly bonded over their personal problems and shared issues with the government, and made the sudden decision to leave Cokeville together. Apparently, within days of David getting fired, he and Doris packed their things and moved down to Tucson, Arizona, bringing David's daughter, Princess, with them. Doris also had a few children, who went with them as well, but this is the only information I found about that. David and Doris together vowed never to return to the wretched town which had betrayed them both. Depending on the source, the two either got married shortly before leaving Cokeville, or when they got to Tucson. These two getting together would prove to be detrimental. After moving to Tucson, Doris took on a job at a local laundromat, while David remained unemployed. Not having a job meant that David had a lot of time on his hands, and unfortunately, it wasn't used for anything good or productive. During the 1980s, the United States saw an influx of neo-Nazis, with organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan and the Aryan Nations amassing an exorbitant number of followers. David unfortunately started to exhibit similar views. His meticulous and concerning writings continued throughout this time, and according to official statements, David filled 43 journals with his nonsense. Apparently his handwriting was atrocious, so it made his demented thoughts difficult to decipher later on. David and Doris also both joined the Posse Comitatus, which is a violent, far-right anti-government-focused group with ties to white supremacy and anti-Semitism. The Posse Comitatus urged its members to disobey the government by refusing to pay taxes, get a driver's license, or comply with authorities. Another big part of their movement is stockpiling weapons, which David and his wife definitely did. David in particular subscribed to this ideology, which seemed to resonate well with him. After all, he blamed the government for all of his shortcomings thus far. He and Doris began to attend meetings, and quickly became enthralled with the message they were being taught. It didn't stop there, though, as David developed an admiration for Adolf Hitler. He apparently even began to think of himself as Hitler reincarnated. David was keen on living in a white world where the government had no power over the people. It isn't surprising that David took the Posse Comitatus's call to action seriously. He soon began to plan a revolution, which would eventually end in what David called a brave new world. In his delusion, David would end up a wealthy leader over an all-white population. This probably sounds completely bonkers to most people who hear about it, but for David, this plan was rational. How would he even begin to launch a revolution, though? Surely he would need to have access to a large amount of money, which he definitely didn't already have, seeing as Doris was the only one working to keep them afloat. This is when the Biggie was born. The Biggie was a nickname for David's master plan for collecting enough money to fund his ridiculous scheme. He and Doris were in on it, at least in the beginning, focusing their attention largely on completing this plan. It was a little more than what they could handle, though, so they eventually enlisted David's daughter, Princess, to help carry it out. David also got two of his closest friends, Gerald Deppe and Doyle Mendenhall, in on it, telling them he had a get-rich-quick scheme that he needed help to execute. The two of them happily obliged, as they weren't against earning some extra money. David would not reveal the specifics of his plot to them, however, telling them he would tell them everything as the plan unfolded later on. This is where Cokeville Elementary School in Wyoming comes in. David's grand plan was to take the students and teachers hostage inside of the school, demanding ransom money. The amount he would ask for is $2 million per hostage, totaling over $300 million. That is equal to almost $850 million today. David, along with Doris and Princess, was developing and testing homemade bombs during this time. Shortly before he carried out the attack, he set a bomb off in a school bus, completely destroying it. He knew he was prepared to do the unthinkable. At some point before the day of the event, David, Doris, Princess, and David's two friends made their way up to Cokeville, Wyoming. I was never able to confirm exactly when they made the drive, but I did read that they had been staying in a motel for a few nights prior to the attack. The deadly plan was officially set into motion on the morning of May 16, 1986. David and Doris loaded their van with multiple rifles and even more handguns. They also packed hundreds of rounds of ammunition. The most worrying weapon they brought with them, though, was their homemade gasoline bomb. This bomb, housed in a modified shopping cart, consisted of several different components. It was rigged with a milk jug full of gasoline, a few open cans filled with gunpowder, and plenty of rounds of ammunition, as well as many chains that would act as shrapnel upon detonation. The triggering mechanism was a clothespin with a piece of wood holding it open. The piece of wood was connected to a string which would be tied around David's arm. If he were to make a movement drastic enough to pull the piece of wood out from the clothespin, it would close, and the electrical circuit would be completed when two screws on either side of the clothespin collided, detonating the bomb. This would give David the opportunity to detonate the bomb at any time he wished, but it also ensured his safety from brave hostages. If he were to be knocked out or otherwise incapacitated, the switch would activate and the bomb would go off. I read that the bomb had the explosive power equivalent to 25 sticks of dynamite, capable of extreme devastation. With their plan now in motion, David let his two friends in on the finer details of his master plan. They were absolutely mortified and declined to go along with it. They were only up for making money quickly, not holding children hostage to do so. Both of the men outright refused to help carry out the evil plan. David was not just about to let them leave and report him to the authorities. Instead, he held them at gunpoint, demanding they get into the vehicle. Gerald and Doyle became David's first hostages, as Doris and Princess handcuffed them in the back of the van. Skipping ahead to the actual attack, it was about 1 p.m. on May 16, 1986, when David, Doris, and Princess Young, along with their two hostages, arrived at Cokeville Elementary School. A first-grade teacher named Janelle Dayton watched through her classroom window. An inconspicuous white van pulled into the parking lot. She said she thought nothing of it, as it wasn't completely out of the ordinary to see this type of vehicle pull up. But she did mention that she had a slight ominous feeling following seeing the van arrive. She went back to her normal routine and shortly left her classroom and headed to the front office to pick up her mail. Another car pulled into the school's parking lot, parking close to the van. The driver was a woman named Cynthia Triplett, and she was there for a job interview. Cynthia remembers looking over at the van and seeing a man and woman inside. She instinctively thought they were janitors and didn't give the two people any more thought. Cynthia then got out of her car and walked towards the building, finally making her way inside. Once she spoke with the school's secretary, Tina Cook, and asked where the nearest restroom was before making her way there. At the same time, David, Doris, and Princess were unloading the massive amount of weapons out of the van, as well as the bomb. David then started the walk up to the school, with his wife and daughter following closely behind, leaving the two men handcuffed in the back of the van. It was about 1:30 p.m. when they made it into the building. When they did, they walked up to Tina Cook's desk. She stated that David announced, "This is a revolution. We are taking your school hostage." He then instructed her to step away from the desk and not to try anything. Tina recalled him opening his jacket, displaying all of the weapons he brought. He also showed her the bomb and explained that if he were to get hit, shoved, or otherwise attacked, the string around his arm would set off the explosion. At about this same time, Cynthia returned from the bathroom. David raised a handgun and aimed it at her. At first, she thought it was just a regular tool, so she said, new job interview technique. She shortly realized that it was a gun and realized the kind of danger she was in. Along with Doris, Tina, the secretary, was tasked with unplugging the nearby phones. She started with her own, and then the two of them went into the principal's office to unplug his. At this time, the principal was on his lunch break. While they were in the office, according to Tina, Doris told her, "Mrs. Cook, I guess you realize that the life of everyone in this building is in your hands right now. How you react will make all the difference in the world. You're doing fine, Mrs. Cook." They then returned to her desk and met back up with David. A few moments later, Janelle Dayton showed up to pick up her mail. That's when she was introduced to the attackers. David then showed Janelle the homemade bomb and explained how it worked, warning her to not try anything, or it would detonate. He also indicated at this time to her that the bomb was powerful enough to destroy a big chunk of the building if it were to go off. Cynthia and Janelle were then forced into a nearby conference room. The two of them sat in the room, before Cynthia suggested they escape through a window. According to Janelle, she refused, stating there was too much at stake, and she didn't want to anger the aggressors. They were eventually gathered by Doris again, and they followed as she led them out of the room. According to Janelle, this was when a young and hysterical woman began to yell at David. It was his daughter, Princess, and she was refusing to go through with the plan, creating a big fuss in the hallway saying, "I can't believe you're going to go through with this." Apparently, she had known about his idea to bomb Cokeville, but did not agree to do so at an elementary school. I also read in a source that she was oblivious to the entire plan, but her helping to load and unload the firearms kind of makes me doubt that. Despite not allowing Gerald and Doyle to leave earlier, David threw the van's keys to Princess. He said, "If you want to go, then go. Get the hell out of here. You're no daughter of mine." Princess ran back to the van, hopped in, and peeled out of the parking lot towards the town hall, desperate to warn someone of the impending attack. When she arrived, Princess frantically alerted the receptionist that an attack was about to occur at the elementary school, and authorities needed to head over there. Authorities were notified of this situation promptly. Back at the school, David turned his attention back onto his plan and bursted through one of the classroom doors, shouting to the occupants that they were now his hostages. As you can imagine, this startled the children, and many of them began to cry. David wasn't too happy about this and began yelling at the children. He shouted, "Sit down and shut up! I have a bomb and I'll set it off if you don't do as I say." The three women, Cynthia, Janelle, and Tina, were guided into the classroom with David, as Doris left to gather more people. She went around the school, announcing to the students and teachers in all of the classrooms that there was a mandatory assembly that was about to start. Back in the room, Janelle stated that David made it clear that he was not opposed to killing the teachers. He said that the children were important to his plan, but he was fine with disposing of the adults. He did, however, make sure to threaten the kids by saying he would shoot them in the legs if they tried to run. The children and teachers from the surrounding classrooms began to file into the room. According to one teacher, Cliss Sparks, she was told by Doris that they needed to come to the other end of the school for the assembly. She thought nothing of it and brought her class over, but by the time they reached the area, no one was in sight, so she and her students went outside instead. Shortly after this, Doris came out, this time pointing a gun at them, and demanded they all get back into the school and into the specific classroom where David was waiting. They were the last class to shuffle into the room. Many of the students and teachers assumed that they were being led to an assembly about firearms when they saw all of the weapons lined up along the walls. In all, 154 people, 136 students and 18 adults were crowded into a single classroom with a maximum capacity of only 30. Multiple guns lined the wall under the chalkboard, and David stood in the middle of the classroom with his homemade gasoline bomb. Doris was stationed at one of the classroom's doors, blocking anyone from leaving. Shortly after gathering everyone into the approximately 30 feet by 30 foot room, Doris walked around and handed out copies of David's manifesto, titled 0 = Infinity, that he had been working on for the past several years. The manifesto is reported to have been written extremely confusingly. Apparently, David talked about anything from reincarnation, Hitler, electricity, laws, Shakespeare, white supremacy, and so forth. According to those who have read it, the manifesto is nothing more than an indiscernible ramble that makes no sense whatsoever. I think it's funny that they were passing this out to elementary school students, some who have only been reading for a year at most. Having this many people in the room, David knew that they would need access to a bathroom, so he instructed the teachers to barricade the hallway past the bathrooms so that they would still be accessible. The barricades were made out of the classroom's tables, desks, and chairs. At this time, the principal got back from his lunch hour and found the group gathered in the classroom. Immediately, he was roped into the attack and was instructed to go make some phone calls to the police, the FBI, and even the president. The principal was also tasked with relaying the ransom info to authorities, that he wanted $2 million per hostage. As I'm sure you can imagine, tensions were high in the first grade classroom. The children quickly became restless, and the teachers did their best to distract them by talking to and playing small games with them. It may have worked for a short time, but ultimately, everyone in the room knew this was a bad situation to be in, so it was hard to relax. The rowdiness in the room began to annoy David quite badly. He was sweating profusely, and the teachers could tell that he was growing really agitated, which put more stress onto them. They knew that David was obviously not stable, and they were worried that the noise from the scared children in the room paired with his evident frustration would cause him to fly off the handle. Depending on the source, either David himself or the teachers came up with a plan to give him his space from the children. They made an 8-foot square on the ground using masking tape and told the kids they were going to play a game called the Magic Square. No one was allowed in the square except for David and Doris. This proved to alleviate some of David's stress, but as expected, it didn't completely resolve the tension. Not only were the hostages uneasy due to the terrifying situation, but David's bomb had sprung a leak. You'll remember that David chose a milk jug to house the gasoline, and apparently, it was not fully intact. Gas was leaking out of the jug and onto the cans of gunpowder below, which in turn filled the room with bothersome fumes. This made many children grow sick quickly, and they began to vomit in various places in the room. Doris was also feeling the effects of inhaling the gasoline smell, and she began to develop a headache. The adults begged David to let them open the windows to try and vent the odor out of the room, and to their surprise, he allowed it. Teachers also asked if they could gather some supplies from the other classrooms to keep the children busy. They were allowed to, and they quickly returned with coloring books, board games, and even a television to watch movies on, hoping to help the kids focus on something else other than their terrifying situation. The mood lightened a bit, thankfully, but the tension was still there. It was one of the students' 10th birthdays that day, and the children gathered to sing happy birthday to him. Teachers also sat with students in groups and prayed with them, desperate to calm them down in any way they could. According to many people who were in the classroom that day, the married couple were telling the children, "This is an adventure. This is something you can tell your grandchildren about." I guess this was an attempt to calm them down. Police had arrived at the school in large numbers, with multiple surrounding counties becoming involved. David eventually established contact with the authorities, and he again demanded the $2 million per hostage. He said, "Tell them I'm prepared to be here 10 days or more, if necessary. It might take Congress that long to raise the money." David also commanded them to connect him with the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan at the time. Police weren't the only ones showing up to the scene. Worried parents and townspeople also showed up, begging the authorities to help their children. The authorities were stumped. There was absolutely no way that they were going to get David over $300 million, but they saw no other way to appease him. It was a seemingly impossible situation. At 3:40 p.m., about 2 hours into the standoff, the kids were beyond restless. It was nearing the end of the school day, and they were anxious to go home. This made the situation much worse, and David was inching closer to the edge. David decided to take a break and use the restroom, so he instructed his wife Doris to come take his spot. She walked over, and David carefully removed the string tied around his wrist, connecting him to the bomb, and placed it around her arm before leaving the room. While David was gone, many reported that Doris began to fidget with the bomb in some way. We will never know exactly what she was doing, but there is a theory that I will present later in the video. One of the teachers in the room tried to talk to Doris. Some reports state that the teacher was attempting to get Doris to let them go, while others state she was simply asking her a question. According to Tina Cook, after complaining about having a headache, Doris lifted her arm to her head, pulling the string, which detonated the bomb. Janelle Dayton had just finished telling another teacher that she didn't believe Doris would blow the children up when she turned and saw the bomb go off. Within a split second, the entire room was engulfed with flames after a massive fireball filled the room. As stated before, David had rigged the bomb with shrapnel as well, which was now launching all over the room, becoming embedded in the ceiling and walls. Tina recalls the room instantly becoming pitch black because of the thick smoke. After hearing the explosion, David went back into the room and found his wife on fire and suffering immensely. According to Janelle, Doris was stumbling around the room begging for help and reaching out for people. The gasoline had drenched her after the explosion, and Tina Cook described her as a walking torch. Upon entering the room, David pulled his gun out and shot his wife in the head, putting her out of her misery. Many believe he was crawling on his hands and knees because Doris was shot through the underside of her chin, and the bullet went through the ceiling. David then made his way back into the hallway and shot at John Miller, the fleeing music teacher, hitting him in the back with a single bullet. After realizing his apparent master plan had failed, he returned to the bathroom and shot himself in the head. He knew that there was nothing more to do, and he was not about to give himself up to the police. Children were frantically running around the dark, smoke-filled room, doing their best to make it out through one of the exits. Janelle was attempting to disassemble a barricade that was built at the beginning of the attack. Some other adults had climbed through the open windows and were yelling for kids to come to the light so they could help them. From outside, teachers were pulling on the little hands which appeared out of the smoke, practically throwing children over their shoulders in order to grab the next set of hands. Worried parents and townspeople feared the worst. The blast was heard all over town, and thick smoke was spilling out of the building. There was no doubt in the minds of onlookers that many people were severely injured or even dead inside. The scene was chaotic outside as well, with children and adults alike running out of the school's many exits. I was never able to verify how, but at some point, Doris's dead body was taken out of the room and laid on the front lawn, where it laid uncovered for a time. Entry to the school was made by a SWAT team, and they rescued several kids who had collapsed in the classroom and surrounding hallways during their attempted escape. I'd like you guys to take a guess how many victims were killed in this explosion. If you guessed 0, you would be correct. I'm happy to report that no innocent child or adult in the room had their lives taken that day. The only 2 casualties of this horrific attack were that of David and Doris Young. The SWAT team that was scouring the wreckage looking for bodies were astonished that there were none apart from the perpetrators. They had been preparing themselves to see children killed and torn apart from the blast. So finding the opposite, no children's bodies in sight, swept relief over the team. Though there were no deaths, many people were severely wounded. 79 children had to be taken to nearby hospitals for immediate treatment, with the closest one being miles away. Back in 1986, Cokeville did not have its own hospital, and as far as I can tell, they still don't. This meant that kids had to be rushed to neighboring cities. I was unable to find out exactly where they were taken, but my point is that there was travel time involved. Many variables contributed to the lives of many being spared that day, some of which are not easily explainable. First of all, the windows and door to the classroom being allowed open acted as a vent, which apparently lessened the effect of the blast. I am in no way a bomb expert by any means, so all of the information regarding the effects and/or circumstances surrounding why it wasn't as devastating is coming strictly from the sources I found. Upon further inspection following the incident, some of the bomb's wires were somehow severed. Many speculate that this was Doris's doing when she was reportedly messing with it while David was in the restroom, but it has never been confirmed. People think that she began to feel bad for the victims and wanted to stop the blast from happening, or at least hamper the effect. It was also discovered that the leak in the milk jug most certainly affected the blast as well. There was no leak prior to the attack, so no one knows where it came from. The cans of gunpowder were sitting directly under the jug, and the gas was dripping into them. Apparently, wet gunpowder does not react as drastically as dry gunpowder. Therefore, the blast was negatively affected. Also, it varies by source, but not all of the blasting caps ignited, which is apparently very rare. As far as I gathered, blasting caps have an extremely low failure rate, so the fact that more than one failed to ignite is wild. Despite deadly shrapnel made out of firearm ammunition and chains flying in random directions throughout the room, no one was killed. I'm unsure if there were injuries caused by this, which I'm sure there were, but it is remarkable that no one died as a result of the shrapnel. The magic square placed around David and the bomb may have also saved lives, as it gave a little distance between the bomb and the victims. However, if the bomb worked as planned, the square wouldn't have made a difference whatsoever. The intended devastation would have leveled the entire wing of the school that the classroom sat in. According to Clis Sparks, another element that helped eliminate casualties was that the school had very recently had a lot of mysterious fire alarm incidents. After thorough investigations, fire rescue personnel were never able to locate the cause of the alarms going off. These strange incidents gave the children a ton of practice on how to get out of the building in an emergency. Not only that, but they had also done a single fire drill in which all students were gathered in the same room. According to Janelle Dayton, she brought up the concern that the children may not know what to do in case of an emergency if they were all together instead of in their respective classrooms. Her concern led to a fire drill that took place while all the students were in the lunchroom. This drill may have helped the kids to not panic as much as they could have, which possibly led to all lives being saved. Janelle said that she believed the room was evacuated so fast because of this recent practice run. Clis Sparks claims that the entire room was empty of victims within 45 seconds of the blast going off. Janelle also stated that the first responder presence was so heavy because there was emergency personnel training going on nearby in town. There is also a significant spiritual aspect to this case. A fair number of children reported seeing angels and/or deceased family members shortly before the blast, telling them to get near the windows. Obviously, something like this can't be proven, but it is certainly interesting to consider. This area, at least in 1986, was a heavily religious one, with most people being a part of the LDS Church. Some believe that the children were coerced or coached into believing they saw angels that day. But again, this can't be proven. No matter what your opinion is on the spiritual aspect of the case, please keep comments respectful. This case is often referred to as the Cokeville miracle, which it most certainly is. If everything had gone to plan, every single person in the room would have died. It's a relief to cover a case that had a happy ending. I am so beyond ecstatic that the only lives lost were those who intended to take innocent people with them. David Young was a very smart and dangerous man, and I'm glad that his plan did not come to fruition. Doris was not the mastermind. She was only following her husband's demands, but she cannot be blameless in this horrific attack. All 79 victims made a full recovery, at least physically. I can't imagine the fear that stuck with them after what they went through. I hope each and every one of them went on to live normal and happy lives. Princess, along with Gerald and Doyle, were never charged with anything following the attack, as they refused to participate. This confuses me a little bit because we can assume from the day's events as well as official reports that Princess knew that her parents planned to set a bomb off in Cokeville, whether she knew it was at an elementary school or not. But nevertheless, I am glad she came to her senses and did the right thing in the end. However, following the bombing, an employee at the motel the Youngs were apparently staying at came forward with some conflicting information. She claims that the day before the attack, she overheard Princess talking on the phone to an apparent friend from Arizona saying, "Tomorrow is the day. Take the pictures down and don't talk to anyone unless there's a warrant." This suggests that Princess knew more than she let on. I don't know if this is 100% truthful, so just keep that in mind. Thank you all for joining me with this truly bizarre case. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about David, his plan, and the failed execution of that plan. I want to thank all of the people who have become members so far. I truly appreciate it. If you would like access to some perks, please do consider becoming a member. You can do so by hitting the join button below or following the link in the description. Thank you in advance if anyone does join. I hope you all found this video informative, and I hope you have a great night or day. Stay safe out there, and until next time, peace.